The CKNA rulebook for 2025 is out, and we're going to go through it real quick because TLDR. Let's get into it. Rulebook changes are something that most organizations have made pretty easy to understand. Usually the changes are in red or yellow, something like that. CKNA is no different. Their changes in red this year. So I'm going to go through the basics. We'll go through it real fast, explain only the things that I think might need a little bit of explanation, and we'll move on. Starting with helmet compliance has become a big problem in series that don't have pre-tech inspections. Luckily, CKNA does, so just make sure that you're up to date. For driver's age, the driver has to be of minimum or maximum age for the class they're registering for within the published dates for the first and last race of the season. That means if the minimum age is 15, you have to be 15 on the first date of the first race. If for any reason an additional date is put after that last date, the driver will have to be of age within that date range, that extended date range. They have given us the heads up that effective 2026, January 1st will be the date by which a driver must be of age for that class in order to qualify for it. For kid karts, a driver will have to be a minimum of 5 years of age regardless of the date. So you can't register for a class unless you are 5 years old, period. And they've also clarified that if you want a waiver for an age, whether to move up early or to stay an extra year, the maximum you can request that for is 1 year. Age waivers are going to be extreme rare circumstances. This is something where a driver's size, their weight, things like that are going to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, you're either of age or you're not. Late entries are only going to be entertained up until the qualifying session for the class you're registering for has begun qualifying. That's more generous than a lot of series are, so take advantage of that. You're at the track, you decide you want to run an extra class, make sure you get out there before qualifying for that specific class begins. Practice procedures only have a few little things. They've clarified that the practice order and length is going to be published in the supplemental rules as well as the schedule. Pre-tech forms are going to have to be in before the last practice or happy hour if there is a happy hour session for all classes. That means all pre-tech inspection items have to be present on the kart at all times. For pre-race procedures, we're going to look at scratch drivers first. It is the discretion of the race director, me in Cup Karts Canada, if due to time or constraints or anything like that, or even if I just feel it's easier to simply have the row that that person has vacated from move forward. For any lineup changes, it is now the driver's responsibility to verify their correct starting position on the grid sheets prior to each race. In other words, you need to pay attention to where your starting position is supposed to be and where they've put it on the sheet. If there's a mistake, get it done right away. Don't wait. Because if it's 30 minutes before your session is going to begin, it's not getting fixed. For racing procedures, we have a few things here, so make sure you're paying attention. Coming up to the green flag, in addition to the drivers being at slow speed and within the tram lines, having the pole sitter set the speed, all drivers need to be in formation in their tram lines until after they pass the start-finish line. It is not race conditions until you've passed that line. If a competitor falls out of position for any reason, they have the opportunity to get that position back up to the last corner before the start-finish line. Make sure that if somebody in front of you has fallen out of position, you keep that position open and available for that driver to get back in there, if they're able to do so, at least until after that last corner. When you get on that straightaway coming up for that green flag, you can then move forward and fill in that position, but not beforehand. If for some reason you're out of position at the start and you've gotten to that last corner and you're not where you're supposed to be, you have to start at the back. You must drop to the back of the field. You can't just slot in where you are. If the start is waved off, however, you now have the opportunity to get back in the position you lost. And if you're one of those drivers where somebody in front of you dropped out, you have to let them back into their position if the start has been waved off. So if the race officials determined that the field was moving too fast, there was other kind of issue that stopped us from going green, drivers must continue around the racetrack and run the entire circuit. There's no reason to shortcut the racetrack unless the race official has directly told you to do so. We do have a clarification. So if we have 2 start attempts made and a specific driver can be pointed out, that driver will be singled out by a black flag by one of the marshals, and they specifically, or them, will specifically be told to go back 2 rows. If no specific driver can be identified as responsible, both drivers on the front row will be sent back to 5th and 6th, and the drivers in 2nd and 3rd will simply move forward. They'll stay where they are and become the pole and off pole positions before the 3rd start is attempted. Once that 2nd start has been waved off, timing scoring starts counting laps which come out of your race. Jump starts. This one's important. Remember that outside pole cannot cross the start-finish line first. If race officials believe that a jump start has happened, it will be verified by timing scoring, unless it is very obvious, like you're half a cart ahead on the off pole. Also remember that jump starts are not eligible for a request for review. Once the call is made and verified by timing scoring, that's it. I mean, why would we appeal something like that when it's been verified by timing scoring? For you kid kart folks, the procedure has been clarified since we do standing starts with you, that parents and handlers, you're going to form on the start line on the hot grid, and then you will be walked out with the carts directly to the racetrack when signaled, and only when signaled. Don't go near the racetrack unless you've been told to by the grid marshal or the race director. Specific instructions are going to be provided by the race director at each event. Each racetrack's a little bit different, and the driver will take a short rolling start towards the start-finish line from there. So we're going to line you up like we always do. So for Kart Damage, they're specifying here that you might get a black flag if your kart is damaged, which is not something that should be a surprise to you, but if an official reasonably believes that that damage is dangerous. Rear bumpers, both sides have to be intact on the kart. You can't have one side dragging. Side pods, fairings, front panels are a little bit different. If the officials feel that, say, the back of a side pod is dragging, but it's attached at the front fairings again, if it's twisted or dragging on the ground, as long as the officials don't reasonably believe that it's a dangerous situation, you're probably going to be allowed to keep going. However, it is up to the race officials to make that decision. If you don't like it, you don't get to continue on the racetrack. Once you get that black flag, off you go. Injured drivers. Now this is important when it comes to red flags and rollovers. In the event of an injury on track, race officials would determine if and when to stop the race. All spectators must remain in the pit area. Once officials have deemed that the situation is under control and safe, we're going to bring a parent out to their kid. We're not monsters. We understand that parents are concerned. I mean, that's your kid on the racetrack. We get it. We want to get you out there just as much for them as it is for you. But you cannot go on that racetrack when the carts are moving. Let the race officials get the carts under control. And I guarantee you, as somebody who's been doing this for a really long time, I am going to give you permission to come out on that racetrack once it's under control. I want you out there when it's safe. Requirements to compete are simply, you need to get out there and attempt to start and complete every scored session. Trying to be strategic about it or simply arriving late, this is going to result in a 5-position penalty for the feature. So if you do this in qualifying, it's going to haunt you the entire race weekend. Get out there, run your qualifying, run your heats, run your feature. Transponder placement has been changed. This is a really important one to understand. The transponders are being moved to the back of the seat. This is much more in line with every other race series that I'm aware of, every other race series I've ever worked. It is behind the seat, 7.5 to 10 inches above the ground, and that's real inches, guys, not your made up ones. And remember that you can't have any obstructions between the transponder and the ground. We're not going to fix it if you've got something in the way and it's not working properly. And as always, remember that the transponder determines finishing order and qualifying times. Doesn't matter what the officials think happened. The only thing that can overturn what timing scoring says is if we are using a start-finish camera, or if a race official like myself specifically asks for competitor-supplied footage. For post-race, the only thing they've added in is if an infraction is found after a heat race specifically, you are only disqualified for that heat. And you're going to be allowed to fix whatever the infraction was, make sure that you're in compliance, and then you can continue racing the rest of the weekend, assuming that you don't do anything else. For driver standards, we've got defensive swerving now as a definition. Defensive swerve, or for some reason they're calling it a Euro swerve here, is identified as rapid change in racing line which influences another driver's ability to maintain position alongside the offending driver. If somebody's trying to get beside you and you move and they have to move or jam on the brakes to avoid you, you get a penalty. It is an obviously dangerous maneuver and it's going to result in disqualification for you. But they do maintain that trying to break the draft, that is, you're moving, snaking along the straightaway and nobody's beside you, you're just trying to break the draft, and they allow that to happen. Team driving. Now this is one that they've had in the past, but they've expanded on it. Competitors are expected to run their own race. You could almost call this the NASCAR rule. A driver has no requirement to attempt to pass, so you can follow and push anybody on the racetrack you want. We're not saying that you can't do that. The problem is if you're being overly defensive, you're blocking, you're taking really crazy lines in, but obviously not making any attempt to pass the driver in front of you, now you've made an offense. And this can be a penalty or disqualification depending on how egregious someone like me feels it is. Remember this being a team rule. If you try and influence a race for somebody else's benefit on your team, we're coming for both of you. Do remember though, if you're somebody who thinks that officials have missed an opportunity for that kind of penalty, there is no protest or request for review for it. We are looking for it. We've been told to try and find it. You don't get to come in afterwards and say, hey, you missed that. I mean, this is CKNA. If we haven't seen it for whatever reason, think of it like soccer. It's part of the game. Then there's re-entering the course. If for any reason you have left the racing area, that is defined at the track, the fencing, the barriers, go off on the grid, you go off anywhere by the scales, that's the end of your session. Penalty guidelines have clarified a couple of things. For contact and driving infractions, normally a driver would be placed behind the driver that they disadvantage. Now they have clarified that the driver will also be given an additional 2-position penalty on top of being placed behind the other driver. In other words, if the person you hit ended up 5th, you no longer end up 6th, you end up 8th. A couple of things. Obviously, we've added swerving in and the defensive swerving disqualification. You've got unlabeled ballast penalty is now a 1-position penalty and will be assessed for each piece of ballast that you do not have labeled. Lost components has been a major issue in every racing series I'm aware of over the past several years. Losing a wheel is obviously the end of your session, but losing a piece of ballast or a camera is an automatic disqualification now, plus penalty points. The obvious exception for these component failures is going to be if it was in a crash. Something else they've specified here is that even though we have guidelines up above, it is the race director's discretion to amend those penalties however they see fit. That's me. That isn't to say that race directors are going to deviate from this very much, but that is available to us if we feel it is warranted. Race under official review is something that probably most of you are used to from other series. Officials may elect to allow the race to finish under official review if there's penalties or incidents that can't be promptly resolved. In other words, you may not have a penalty show up on the board when you come off the racetrack because I need to look at some footage or we need some other investigation. Maybe I need to talk to some corner marshals or other officials on the racetrack. It helps us make better calls. It helps competitors because we're making better calls. So sometimes we need that time and they're making allowances for it. And for habitual offenders, this goes back to what I said a minute ago about race director has the discretion to amend the penalty guidelines for a given situation, and if a particular driver is a problem on a regular basis or involved in a lot of incidents over time, we have the ability to up penalties, go to disqualifications, or even suspensions. For race format and scoring, now you're going to be able to go through this stuff on the day, so I'm going to kind of go past it, just adding in a little bit. Same with divisional championship awards, Vega VHA slicks, and Vega W6 rain tires. Now this is interesting that all sessions are driver's choice unless the race director has specifically called a mandatory rain race. In other words, if I have not specifically called a rain race, you can choose to go out on rain tires. I wouldn't suggest it, but it's available to you. Tires have to have the correct country of origin. That's nothing new for a lot of you. Periodic compliance checks are something that you should be used to, but it's putting it into words here that tech has the ability to do checks. Doesn't matter if it's for compliance or safety, they have the ability to do that, because of course they do. All other pre-tech items, if you fail to have them on the cart post-tech, you're going to get disqualified for it. Just because you passed pre-tech in the morning doesn't mean you can start pulling stuff off your cart. You have to make sure that all those pre-tech items are on the cart for the entire race weekend. Failing to correct an item that you've been told to fix before the next session might result in exclusion from the event. And if you have been disqualified for any compliance reason, there is no review. For engine and chassis change, you have to do the swap in the tech area, which again is one of those things that you should all be used to by now. And that replaced engine or chassis is going to remain with tech for the entire event. You're not getting it back till everything's done. If that chassis or engine's being run in multiple classes, that replacement engine or chassis has to be run in those multiple classes. If the reason for it to not be able to race in one class is enough that you have to replace it, you're going to have to run that one chassis, that one engine, those replacements in both classes. Now there are a bunch of tech things here, but since most of you aren't going to be engine people, we're not going to go through those now. I think this TLDR is already getting a little L. Now here we are specifying the request for review. Now remember that you can only request to review certain things under certain conditions, and it has to be based on a call that was made, not a call that was missed. In these situations, when a driver likes to request a review of penalty stemming from a race that finished under official review, drivers have no more than 30 minutes from the time that the grid sheets are posted, or 60 minutes prior to the start of the next race for that class. Now understand, in some situations, you might not have time for that, and that's part of the game. Nice little change is that if the race review official, for whatever reason, isn't available or isn't where they're supposed to be because they have some other task that they're performing, you can take your request for review form to the head tech official. Something that's nice for people like me is that we now have the ability to review any officially obtained video or footage obtained from another competitor's onboard camera. For competitor technical protests, they've specified that you can't file one for safety item or listed on the CKNA pre-tech form. For race classes, make sure that you check through. There are a few differences from last year and still a few differences between Canada and the US for some reason, so make sure you have a look. And that about wraps it up. So make sure that you have a look through these rules. It's really nice that all the changes are listed out in red. If you've never run a CKNA race, trust me, it is worth the time. Come on out, have some fun. We'll be glad to have you. Thank you very much for watching. Do you think there's anything that they missed in changing the rules? Do you disagree with anything that they changed in the rules? Let me know down in the comments. Like, subscribe. Tell me if you like this format of the TLDR thing. And otherwise, I will see you at the racetrack.